Today I'm going to be taking a look at The Big Bang Theory, Season 2, Episode 22, The Classified Materials Turbulence. This episode starts off in the comic book store with Leonard, Sheldon, Raj, and Howard all there for New Comic Book Day. Howard is in a particularly good mood because he has a invention that he had been working on that's going to be deployed on the International Space Station, being a zero-gravity waste disposal system, which is basically a space toilet. This is a good accomplishment for Howard, and of course gets him a little bit mocked by everybody because it is still a toilet. Stuart comes over to give Sheldon a copy of a comic book and tells him that it's amazing. Sheldon is upset because although this isn't a direct spoiler to the content, he believes that he has now told him that it's mind-blowing, so he believes he's going into it with his mind pre-blown. Sheldon tries to take some revenge by asking him if he's read the most recent Flash, and tells him it'll knock his socks off, and says good luck with putting those back on. Now, we do get another interesting interaction with Stuart in this scene, and if we remember 2 episodes ago, Stuart did have a date with Penny. Now, Stuart tells Leonard that the date didn't go well, but if we remember back, the date actually did go pretty well. It wasn't until after the date, where Penny had invited him in, that things took a turn when he spent more time talking to Sheldon instead of interacting with Penny, as he should have continued. Either way, he has managed to get another chance, and he has a second date with Penny, and he asks Leonard what he should expect, and if he thinks that Penny will expect them to get physical after a second date. Now, Penny was potentially looking to get physical after the first date, so he should be aware, but he was pretty unobservant to that after their first date. This, of course, makes Leonard very uncomfortable, and he says he'll get back to him. And Howard jokes that if he wants to mess things up for Stuart and Penny, all he has to do is tell Stuart to do exactly what Leonard's done for the last 2 years, which has resulted in no positive momentum with Penny for him. And unfortunately for Leonard, he has to hear about it on both sides. For when he gets home, he runs into Penny, and she mentions the date with Stuart as well. She asks if he's comfortable with her going out with one of his friends, something she didn't do before the first date, but decided to do it this time. He reluctantly says he doesn't mind, but when Penny tries to ask for some advice about Stuart, Leonard tries to sabotage things a little bit by giving some bad advice that will ultimately sabotage Stuart. And later in the cafeteria at the university, Sheldon and Leonard are having lunch, and Stuart is trying to call Leonard to get that advice, but Leonard is ignoring the call, upsetting Sheldon because of his severe obsessive-compulsive disorder, and he is very upset that Leonard won't answer the phone.
Answer the phone, Leonard. No!
And then after Leonard lets the call go to voicemail, Sheldon continues to be upset, saying that he needs to immediately check his voicemail.
You have to check your messages, Leonard. The leaving of a message is one half of a social contract, which is completed by the checking of the message.
To complete the social contract that was created by the sending and receiving of the voicemail. Howard comes in to tell them that he's dealing with a code red situation, and that's that he's discovered an error in his zero-gravity disposal system, in which basically it's going to fail after about 10 flushes. This is a big problem because the mission that they are on is 6 months, and that is far going to exceed 10 flushes. He doesn't know how to fix it yet, so he's asking the gang for help because he wants to have a solution before he notifies NASA of the problem. So he gathers everybody back at Leonard and Sheldon's apartment with a prototype of the toilet, which Raj makes us a funny observation that instead of being a disposal system, it could now be a distribution system.
Don't you mean the Wolowitz zero-gravity human waste distribution system?
Since the failure will result in launching things out of the toilet that you don't want coming out of the toilet. Howard has assembled a rough estimate of the spare materials available on the space station, and the plan is for them to try to use these materials to try to figure out a viable repair. After making several attempts to contact Leonard by phone, email, and other methods, Stuart just knocks on the door, and Leonard's there, so he tries to ask him for that advice, and Leonard tries to again sabotage him and give him bad advice. Penny had said she was worried about Stuart being too shy, and Leonard said not to worry about that. So what Leonard tells Stuart to do is to try to move very, very slow with Penny and try to be very shy. Leonard clearly does not want Stuart to have success with Penny and is willing to directly sabotage him. And this was moments before their date. Leonard does begin to feel bad about it and realize that he did try to sabotage Stuart, and everybody else pretty much confirms that this was a bad thing to do. As they're trying to work on the toilet, they realize that nothing seems like it's going to work, and Howard suggests maybe he should just flee the country, and Sheldon says that might work. The next morning, after they've been working all night, Leonard goes over to talk to Penny and ask how the date went with Stuart. Penny basically says she doesn't want to talk about it, and Leonard seems like he's going to come clean about his bad advice, but Penny just reiterates that she doesn't want to talk about it, and what happens between her and Stuart isn't Leonard's business. Penny seems a bit all over the place about this topic. First, she's asking Leonard for his approval, then asking him for some advice, and then when he comes back to talk to her about it again, she shuts it down. Leonard's guilt continues to eat at him, so he decides to leave and go talk to Stuart at the comic book store. Sheldon wants to go with him, but Howard says he needs to stay and help him continue to try to work on the toilet. They eventually do come up with a solution that Howard thinks might work, and they decide to do a test, and he puts a piece of meatloaf in as an analog, and they try to flush it, and instead it is launched straight to the ceiling.
One.
And at this point, if that's what's going to happen on the space station, you gotta feel bad for those poor astronauts. Leonard arrives at the comic book store and talks to Stuart. He tries to apologize, saying he thinks he gave him bad advice, but Stuart says his advice was good. He went slow, and they had a couple bottles of wine and ended up making out in his car. So things were going well until things weren't, because when he said, "Oh, Penny," Penny replied by saying, "Oh, Leonard." So that seems to be why Penny was very awkward about the situation, and it also seems to have ended things between Penny and Stuart. Leonard pretends to be sad for Stuart about this, but can't hide his excitement as he's leaving the store and begins to jump into the air. We next see Howard on the phone talking to NASA, and they are telling him to keep everything classified, and he says he certainly will, although Leonard does tell Penny that he'll tell her about it later. And Howard is hopeful that their proposed repair will work, and everybody else is a little bit calmer because their careers aren't the ones at stake if it doesn't. Penny asks Leonard to pass the soy sauce, and he's having a little fun knowing what happened between her and Stuart. So he says, "Did you say my name?" And she says, "Yes." And of course he says, "Of course you did." And then a piece of meatloaf falls from the ceiling, and when Leonard asks why it was up there, he says that's classified information. And we end the episode, and with this ending, we can assume that either Howard's repair did not work, or they had not implemented it yet because they show the International Space Station, and the astronauts are saying that they are needing to step outside, I'm guessing because the toilet malfunctioned and began launching waste into the air, and they said they need to step out to get some fresh air. However, we can assume Howard didn't get too much backlash because his career didn't, of course, end going forward. And that is The Big Bang Theory Season 2, Episode 22, The Classified Materials Turbulence. So as we know, up until this point, Leonard and Penny have been on this roller coaster up and down with developing feelings for each other, and it seems like at different times they've both had different levels and different wantings of being together, and it just seems to have never synced up. But as we can see from this episode, they both clearly still have feelings for one another, and they might not still be synced up, but they are still heading in a direction for something to happen between them. I mean, we see in this episode, Stuart gets another chance to date with Penny, and it does seem to go okay, but Penny says Leonard's name when they're kissing, so that, of course, shuts things down between them. And on Leonard's side of things, earlier in the episode, we saw that he was willing to try to sabotage Stuart in order to end his relationship with Penny, even though he does end up feeling bad about it and even tries to apologize. It does seem that things are building to a new point. We are going to see some movement with Leonard and Penny going forward. And we do. It's just fun to watch this build along the way. And I wanted to note something about Howard here. It is interesting to see that Howard, we do see positive movement in his career at times. And sometimes it's more and more obvious than the other careers. I don't know if that's because of the nature of engineering, but at times he's a little bit mocked by the group because he's the only one in the group who doesn't have a PhD. However, his career is always moving forward and he seems to be making positive contributions. This is a great episode full of good humor and character development, and I would score this episode a 9 out of 10. Let me know your thoughts of this episode in the comments section, and please be sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment, and keep an eye out for the next video coming soon.